The courtroom smelled like polished wood and nerves. I stood near the witness table, hands steady around a small silver USB labeled Jupiter. My husband, soon-to-be ex, sat across from me, his eyes flicking from the judge to the device as if it were a loaded weapon. His tie was crooked. His confidence was gone. I wasn't shaking. For the first time in months, I felt still. He hid $400,000 in crypto. I found something worth far more than that piece. The judge's voice faded into background noise as my mind slipped back 3 months earlier to the morning it all began. It was one of those quiet California mornings when the ocean breeze smells of espresso and salt. Jack was humming in the kitchen, scrolling through crypto charts on his tablet like a surgeon checking a heartbeat. He smiled, that self-satisfied smile I used to find charming. "Bitcoin's up again," he said, pouring coffee into my mug. "We might finally take that Italy trip." He said we like it was a promise, but something in his tone felt rehearsed. He kissed my forehead and left for work, his leather bag brushing my hip like an afterthought. That evening, my card declined at the grocery store for the first time in 5 years. The cashier looked embarrassed for me. I laughed it off, pretending it was a system error, but later in the parking lot, I checked the bank app and saw something that didn't make sense. Money was missing. Not a small fee or a payment I forgot, but several thousand gone in a clean line. Maybe a transfer, I told myself. Maybe an investment thing he forgot to mention. Still, something coiled inside me. I remembered what my friend Lydia once said over wine numbers: never lie. People do. At the time, I'd laughed. That night, the quote kept circling my mind like a drone I couldn't shut off. The next morning, I brought it up gently over breakfast. "Hey," I said, pretending to stir sugar I didn't need, "did you move some money from the joint account? There's a withdrawal I don't recognize." Jack didn't even look up from his phone. "Yeah, just shifting funds to diversify," he said. "Don't worry. It's all for our future." The word "our" hit wrong. I watched him scroll through a list of crypto tokens with the same ease most people browse grocery coupons. He always said I didn't understand digital finance, as if ignorance were part of my charm. He looked up, smirked, and added, "You wouldn't want to stress about numbers, babe. Leave it to me." He said it with affection, but it landed like a brick. I smiled because that was easier than fighting. "If us means both of us," I said lightly, "then maybe you should leave a note next time." He laughed, kissed my cheek, and walked out humming again. The door shut. The silence that followed was heavier than usual. I stared at the spot where his tablet had been and noticed the small sticker on the back Jupiter. He'd named his crypto wallet after a planet known for storms. I told myself it was just a coincidence. Over the next week, little things started to glitch. Our power bill bounced once. A client payment didn't hit my account on time because he'd adjusted where deposits went. Each explanation was just convincing enough to quiet my instinct for a day. But by the second week, that instinct was loud. One night, he fell asleep on the couch. I glanced at his tablet, half open, a wallet interface glowing faintly on the screen. The numbers were staggering. I didn't touch it, but my stomach dropped. He wasn't saving for us. He was saving for me. I looked at him snoring softly, one arm thrown across the cushion, the man I'd trusted with every paycheck, every plan, and felt something in me settle. Not rage, not heartbreak. Something colder, a decision forming quietly like frost on glass. The next morning, I made him breakfast. He kissed my head left again, and I sat at the same table with my laptop. I created a document titled Ledger of Lies. It started with a single line, February 2nd, 2023, transfer to unknown crypto wallet label, Jupiter. 3 words followed it. If he hid, I'll find. Later that evening, he showed me a new crypto graph with childish excitement. "This is the future," he said. I smiled. "Yes," I replied, "and the future always comes with receipts." He laughed, thinking it was a joke. I stirred my coffee, watching the silver USB I'd bought online flash once with its tiny blue light. I didn't know it then, but that small device would become my weapon, my witness, and my freedom. He hid $400,000 in crypto. I found peace worth more, and peace I was learning compounds faster than interest. Ava Sinclair liked to tell herself that her life in Pacific Beach was finally steady. Morning sun slid across the kitchen tiles, the palm trees outside framed the windows, and the house they rented looked close enough to perfect to fool anyone who did not live inside it. 2 bedrooms, white walls, a tiny office that doubled as her workspace, and a small patio where she dried laundry and watched the ocean when she needed to breathe. She and Jack left for work at almost the same time every day, and they liked to call that rhythm partnership. They split the rent. They split electricity, water, internet, groceries, date nights, even dog sitting for a neighbor when they traveled. Jack loved repeating in front of friends that they did everything 50-50 because they respected each other. Ava smiled every time because that was easier than telling him the truth, which was that respect in their house had started to feel like a spreadsheet he managed. She worked as a financial analyst, and to her numbers were information. To Jack, numbers were leverage. He kept a shared budgeting app on his phone and gave her access to it, but he was always the one explaining where money should go. She kept thinking he planned our budget. I planned our peace. At that time, it seemed harmless. He said the market was unpredictable, so they should keep spending tight. He said her student loan payment was priority. He said their emergency fund needed to grow before they thought about vacations. Every sentence began with he said, and for a while she let it pass because he also kissed her shoulder while pouring coffee, and small tenderness can disguise control. The first crack did not arrive with shouting. It arrived as an email. She was clearing her inbox on a Tuesday and saw a receipt from a spa in La Jolla. $285, full package. Name on the invoice was Jack Dalton, service reserved for client. Ava frowned because Jack had talked nonstop about tightening expenses. That weekend, he had teased her for buying a candle on sale and said $12 for scented wax was how marriages went broke. Yet here he was paying almost $300 for someone else to get eucalyptus steam and hot stones. She opened the detailed receipt and her eyes stopped at the note for Cheryl. Not client, Cheryl. The same Cheryl who had borrowed $5,000 from Ava the year before to fix a shipment problem at her boutique and had still not paid it back. Ava read the receipt again just to make sure it was not a mistake. It was billed to their joint card. It stung in a way she had not expected. Self-care apparently ran in that family. It was not the amount. It was the principle. They were a couple that discussed every takeout order. Jack had told her no to a weekend trip because rent was due. Now he was playing generous cousin with her money. The picture of him as responsible provider slipped a little out of frame. That night, she did something she almost never did. She opened the bank portal after dinner and went back through the last 60 days. She expected to find maybe 1 or 2 stray payments. Instead, she found a pattern that looked too familiar to be random. There was the spa charge. There was an online payment to a boutique supply company in the same city where Cheryl ran her shop. There was a purchase at a menswear store in downtown San Diego that sold suits starting at $900. She looked across the living room at Jack, who was watching a documentary like nothing in the world was out of place. Ava scrolled again and saw another charge at the tech store for a high-end tablet case. The card number was hers. Her name, her credit history, her careful score. Jack had always insisted on using her card because she collected better points. What he did not say was that he also liked how those charges blended into the long list of her professional expenses. She remembered him telling her the month before that they needed to slow down on eating out. She remembered returning a dress because he said they should save. She thought to herself that he had hidden $400,000 in crypto, but still complained about a $12 candle, and this time the irony did not make her laugh. It made her eyes burn. This was no longer about money amounts. This was about who was allowed to spend freely and who had to explain why she bought something for herself. That imbalance was louder than any argument. It was the kind of quiet disrespect women in her mother's generation swallowed because they did not make their own money. Ava made her own money, and she still almost swallowed it. So she did what came naturally to her. She opened a fresh sheet on her laptop and titled it The Perfect Marriage Ledger. The name was bitter and a little funny. On the first line, she entered the rent payment and marked it clean. On the second line, she put electric. On the third line, she put internet. Everything they had agreed on was marked shared. Then she created a new section, unauthorized outflow. She wrote La Jolla Spa for Cheryl 285. She wrote boutique supply transfer 463. She wrote menswear downtown 940. She added a small comment next to each entry, see conversation later. Every dollar was a breadcrumb to the truth. She sat back and looked at the growing list, and a calm settled in her chest. This was not rage. This was control coming back to her. If there was one thing she knew better than Jack, it was that money always left footprints. People lied. Transactions did not. She saved the file to the small silver USB she had bought, and she typed the word Jupiter next to it because if he could name a secret wallet after a planet, then she could name the evidence after his secret. She did not confront him that night. She did not slam the receipt on the table. She did not cry in the bathroom. She chose the slower road because it leaves less mess. In bed, Jack pulled her close and told her he was proud of how disciplined they had been. Ava looked into the dark and finally understood what had been bothering her for weeks. He was not proud of them. He was proud of how well he had convinced her to fund the life he wanted while calling it partnership. That was the night she stopped believing the story he liked to tell. That was the night the marriage stopped being perfect and started being measurable. From that point on, she wrote everything down because written numbers stay honest even when people do not, and she planned to stay honest. The first week of March brought spring light and a new announcement from Jack. He came home waving a folder like a prize. Dalton Digital LLC, he said with a grin that filled the kitchen. Our future. He dropped the papers on the counter. Ava wiped her hands and leaned over to read. The business certificate listed only one owner. Jack Dalton. No mention of a partner or joint signature. She smiled, slow and careful. So it is our company. He nodded, distracted, already pouring wine. Of course. You know legal stuff. Easier to file under one name. She traced her finger along the black print and felt a small chill. Funny how ours never makes it to the paperwork. That night, she checked the state registry just to be sure. Only one member. No shared stake. He had built a company using their shared savings and left her invisible. She did not say anything. Instead, she asked about his plans, how he wanted to position the brand, and he talked about marketing and future investors, like a man already building empires. Ava poured more wine and said she was proud of him. Her voice did not shake. A week later, her phone buzzed with a credit alert. A new account had been opened in her name. She frowned and logged in. It was a business credit line attached to Dalton Digital LLC. She scrolled through the details and froze. The signature field was hers. The social security number matched hers. Jack had used her credit to boost his company's limit. For a few seconds, she could not breathe. It was the kind of betrayal that felt cold, not loud. She called the bank pretending to confirm a detail, and they told her the application came through a verified online portal with their home address. When she hung up, her pulse was a steady hammer in her ears. My trust score dropped before my credit score did. That night at dinner, he was cheerful again. Big news, he said, slicing chicken. Got a line of credit approved. That means I can finally scale. She watched him across the table, the man who used her identity and thought she would never notice. She said softly, "That's great. Did they ask for much paperwork?" He looked up surprised by her calm, then shrugged. "Routine stuff. You know how these banks work." She nodded, taking another bite. "Yeah, routine." When he turned back to his phone, she smiled faintly at the irony of that word. Routine indeed. 2 days later, she tested him. She dropped the small silver USB on the floor beside the coffee table while pretending to reach for a magazine. It clinked once. Jack looked down, saw it, and froze. "What's that?" he asked too quickly. "Just work files," she said, and bent to pick it up. He laughed nervously, eyes darting to her laptop. "You are always working. You need to relax." His voice was tight. You can tell guilt by how fast they close their laptops, she thought as he flipped his screen shut in one motion. She tucked the USB into her pocket, heart steady. Every reaction was confirmation. She did not need him to confess. Numbers would. That evening, she called Lydia. They had met years ago at a compliance workshop, and Lydia had a way of sounding like both an analyst and a philosopher. So Ava said when Lydia answered, "What would you do if your husband used your credit score to fund his dream?" Lydia's voice was quiet for a moment. "You could confront him," she said, "but that gives him control of the story, or you could let the numbers do it." Silence buys interest. Ava laughed softly. "You always have a quote for everything, not a quote." Lydia replied, "A fact. People talk. Data waits." They talked for almost an hour. Lydia told her how financial misconduct inside marriages often went unnoticed because it hid under love and routine. Ava wrote that down. Financial misconduct under love and routine. It sounded like the perfect headline for her life. After the call, she stood by the window looking out at the streetlights reflecting on the parked cars. She thought about how Jack loved saying he was building something for both of them while quietly using her identity to do it. She thought about the signature forged in digital ink, her own name turned into collateral. The realization was painful but also clarifying. This was not a misunderstanding. It was strategy. Jack was not careless. He was calculated. That knowledge did not make her cry. It made her sharper. She opened her ledger again and added a new line. March 14th, Dalton Digital LLC registered under his name only. March 18th, credit line application using my SSN. She saved the file and whispered to herself, "Silence buys interest." She believed it now. The house around her felt smaller but cleaner. The lies were still there, but they had boundaries. She had written them down. She had proof. Outside, waves hit the shore with soft rhythm. Inside, she made a cup of tea and opened her browser to learn about small business law in California. If he wanted to build Dalton Digital, she would make sure the ledger of his empire matched the truth. She closed the laptop at midnight, her mind already forming the next step. She was not planning revenge. She was documenting justice. The difference mattered. Ava had never been much interested in crypto. Before all this began, Jack had tried to explain it years ago, calling it the future of finance, while she nodded politely and let him feel like a pioneer. But now, sitting at her desk with a cup of cold coffee and the USB named Jupiter glowing faintly beside her, she was the one decoding his so-called future. She opened the wallet tracker she had installed the week before and followed the string of transactions. It was almost beautiful the way digital money left footprints across the blockchain, transparent and permanent. Every transaction whispered a truth. The screen showed a list of outgoing transfers from the main wallet labeled JD Digital Reserve. One entry stopped her breath. Boutique transfer ID ending in 7113. Recipient tag Cheryl Designs. She blinked twice to make sure she was reading correctly. Family business My Foot. He had been funneling money from their savings into his cousin's store for months. The total reached almost $30,000. Not investments, not loans, disguised gifts. She remembered Cheryl posting pictures online of a store renovation. New mirrors, imported lighting, all captioned with gratitude to a silent investor. Ava had thought nothing of it then. Now it burned. She scrolled deeper and saw other expenses that bordered on absurd. A $1,200 charge for something called Luxury Dog Bed Deluxe. She stared at it for a full minute, then laughed once, sharp and humorless. "Even the dog sleeps better than I do," she muttered. It was a ridiculous line, but it fit the absurdity of her life. Jack's empire of lies included designer pillows for pets, while he lectured her about saving on groceries. For the first time in weeks, she laughed again, a small crack in the surface of anger that let something colder through. She leaned back, eyes on the glowing numbers. This was more than betrayal. It was theft wrapped in confidence and charm. She wondered if he ever felt guilty, or if he had convinced himself it was all temporary, that one day he would pay her back when his business succeeded. but people who take without asking rarely stop on their own. Ava decided to test how deep it went. She created a dummy crypto wallet using a throwaway email and uploaded a few mock transactions under aliases that mimicked his clients. Then she traced the blockchain activity using the software's public ledger search. Hours passed. The screen filled with lines of code symbols and wallet IDs that looked meaningless until one pattern repeated. Every few days, a small amount moved from JD Digital Reserve to another address that looked oddly familiar. It was registered under the same sequence Jack used for their old joint savings. She cross-checked and realized it connected to a personal account under his father's name. Her hand went cold around the mouse. She clicked again. Another wallet linked to Cheryl's boutique but funded indirectly through his mother's account. The whole family was the LLC. The thought landed heavy in her chest. She had been fighting a husband. What she actually faced was a household network of shared deceit. It was a family tradition of taking. She remembered Jack's mother boasting at dinner about teaching him to be financially clever, how his father had always found legal loopholes. At the time, Ava had laughed politely. Now she saw it for what it was training. Her anger was no longer hot. It was precision cold. She copied every wallet ID, every timestamp, every conversion from crypto to cash. She labeled them clearly in her ledger. March 25, outgoing transfer to boutique Cheryl Designs, $30,000 total. March 27, transfer to account under Robert Dalton. April 1st, same to Carol Dalton. She made columns for amounts and wallet origins. She attached screenshots and stored them in Jupyter. He taught me blockchain, she whispered. I taught him exposure. It was almost poetic. She did not feel powerful, yet just alert, like a diver who realizes how deep the water truly is. At midnight, she saved her work and turned off the lights. The blue glow from the USB lingered like a heartbeat in the dark. She sat back and thought of how trust works. It is not destroyed all at once. It erodes quietly, transaction by transaction, until you realize you are bankrupt in spirit long before the money runs out. The next morning, she made breakfast and smiled as he entered the kitchen. "You look tired," he said. "Working too hard again?" She shrugged. "Just finishing a report." He kissed her cheek and left. As soon as the door closed, she opened her laptop again. This time, she exported the data into a format she could show in court if needed. No emotions, just evidence. Every receipt, every line, every transaction painted a portrait of someone who believed himself untouchable. The discovery should have devastated her, but instead it clarified her world. Everything fake had fallen away. She could finally see the structure underneath their marriage, and it was made of transactions, not love. She poured another cup of coffee and looked out at the street where couples walked dogs and neighbors waved good morning. On the outside, her life still looked normal. Inside, it had already become a case study in betrayal family karma. She wondered how long it would take for the universe to balance the books. When she closed the document, she whispered the phrase that had become her compass. Every dollar is a breadcrumb to the truth. She had followed the trail this far. She was not stopping now. Ava had learned that silence could do more damage than shouting. It was late April when she began to prepare in secret. The nights were longer, the air smelled of ocean and metal, and she moved through the house like someone visiting a museum of lies. Jack still worked from the converted garage where he called clients and managed his so-called company. He had no idea that the same space was about to become her quiet witness. One morning while he showered, Ava placed a small recording device on a beam behind a shelf stacked with empty boxes. It looked harmless, just another forgotten gadget in his pile of tech. She checked the connection twice, then left the garage door slightly ajar to avoid suspicion. Silence does not mean surrender, she thought as she walked back into the kitchen. It means preparation. For days, she went about life as if nothing had changed. She cooked, went to work, paid bills, smiled when he told stories about expansion and investors. Every word he said now sounded like the rehearsal of a man selling a version of himself that did not exist. On Thursday afternoon, she sat in the car outside the house, heart steady but cold, and replayed the first recording. Static first, then his voice confident and careless. "She will never find it," Jack said. Laughter followed another voice she recognized as Cheryl's. "She thinks she knows numbers," Cheryl replied, "but she cannot touch the crypto." Jack chuckled. "Exactly. It is untraceable. Even if she looks, she will not understand the system. She trusts too easily." Ava pressed pause, staring at the steering wheel. The words landed like glass underfoot, sharp, but confirming. She was not paranoid. She was outnumbered. "Challenge accepted," she whispered. That night, she played the same clip again, but this time without flinching. It became motivation, not pain. Silence was her ally. Noise belonged to those who feared the truth. The next morning, she made pancakes, humming softly as Jack scrolled through his phone. "Internet acting up again," he muttered. She smiled and said, "Maybe it needs an upgrade." He nodded, not knowing that while he was asleep, she had changed the Netflix password and updated every subscription to her own account. It was petty, but it felt good. When he tried to open the app later that night and saw access denied, he frowned and called from the living room. "Babe, did you change something? I cannot log in." She looked up from her laptop, pretending confusion. "That is strange. Maybe it logged you out. You can pay for the next month if you want." He grumbled and reached for his wallet. Ava turned back to her work, hiding a small smile. Decentralized entertainment, she thought. Even the jokes came from balance sheets now. The humor did not erase the hurt, but it gave her breath between blows. Every small act of control reminded her she was still inside the story, not written out of it. 2 days later, she decided it was time to make the next move. She had proof, but proof without structure was chaos. She needed someone who could turn it into consequence. That was when she called Diane Harlow. Diane had once been the company lawyer for Ava's firm, sharp enough to intimidate executives twice her size. Ava had always admired how Diane spoke like each sentence was already a motion filed in court. They met in a quiet cafe near downtown San Diego, where the walls smelled of roasted beans and confidence. Ava arrived first and chose a seat facing the door. When Diane walked in, tailored suit and calm eyes, the noise in the cafe seemed to soften. "You look tired," Diane said, sliding into the seat. Ava nodded. "Financial fatigue," she replied, trying to smile. Diane raised an eyebrow. That bad Ava pulled out the USB, the ledger printouts, and the small recorder. "I have evidence," she said quietly, "but I do not want confrontation. I want clarity." Diane listened without interrupting as Ava explained everything from the forged credit line to the crypto transfers and the recorded conversation. When Ava finished, the lawyer leaned back and crossed her arms. "You did well," she said, finally. "You kept receipts." "I kept everything," Ava answered. "Now I just do not know what to do with it." Diane tapped her finger on the table once, twice, thinking. Then she said the words that settled into Ava's bones like armor. "Do not confront him. Collect him." Ava looked up. "Collect him." "Yes," Diane said. "You already have the data. Let him think he still holds power. When the time comes, you let the system do the talking. Emotional reactions lose credibility. Evidence does not." Ava felt something inside her shift, a small flame steadier than anger. She sipped her coffee and nodded slowly. "So, I keep quiet." Diane smiled. "Exactly. Silence is your witness now." They spent the next hour organizing a plan. Diane would verify the recordings, log the financial transfers, and prepare the initial claim for fraudulent use of identity and misappropriation of joint funds. Ava listened, taking notes, feeling her heartbeat slow into focus. She left the cafe with a sense of order she had not felt in months. The air outside was crisp, the sun low over the bay. She walked back to her car, her mind repeating the phrase like a prayer. Do not confront him. Collect him. When she pulled into the driveway later that evening, Jack was outside, watering the plants, as if their life were a postcard of domestic harmony. He smiled at her, asked about her day, kissed her forehead. She answered softly, matching his tone because silence now had a purpose. It was not weakness anymore. It was a strategy with evidence attached. That night before bed, she copied every new file onto Jupiter. The small device blinked once a blue pulse in the dark. She whispered to it the same words she had written weeks ago. Silence does not mean surrender. It means I am counting. Ava woke one morning with a strange calmness that felt like clarity disguised as routine. The ocean outside shimmered through the window blinds, and for once she did not feel anger when she heard Jack moving around the kitchen. She smiled at her reflection and practiced the face she used to wear, the one that said everything was fine. The best mask is routine, she thought. She cooked dinner that evening like any good wife would. The table was set with candles, the wine poured, the music soft. Jack walked in, surprised by the atmosphere. "What is all this?" he asked, dropping his keys. Ava laughed lightly. "I felt like celebrating. You've been working so hard." He relaxed instantly, ego soothed by attention. They ate together, and he talked about his latest business plans, a new client, and potential investors. She listened carefully, nodding at the right times, even touching his hand now and then. Inside, her mind was counting every lie he told as another line in her invisible spreadsheet. He spoke about loyalty and honesty, and she almost laughed at the irony. When dessert came, she pulled a small gift from her bag, wrapped in simple paper. "For you," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "What is this?" "Just something small," she replied. Jack tore the paper open and found a hardcover book titled Honesty. He chuckled. "You are funny," he said. She smiled. "Open it." He flipped through the pages and a single fake $1 bill slipped out. He looked at it puzzled. She tilted her head. "It is worth exactly as much as your truth," she said softly, almost playfully, as if it were a private joke. He laughed again, unaware she meant every word. The conversation shifted to movies and future vacations. He poured more wine, confident again, unaware that across the table, Ava was memorizing the shape of this moment, knowing it would soon belong to history. After dinner, she helped him clear the plates, her movements slow and deliberate, her voice light. When he leaned in to kiss her neck, she smiled. Every gesture was part of the performance. Later that night, after he fell asleep on the couch, she retrieved the small USB from her desk and connected it to her laptop. All the files were ready, organized by category. Transactions, wallet trails, audio recordings, signatures. Every lie had an invoice now. She zipped the folder and encrypted it. The next morning, while Jack was in the shower, she transferred the entire package to Diane. The email was simple and precise. Subject line, evidence for review. Body text, Diane here are all verified records. Ledger summary attached. Please confirm receipt and proceed with next step. Ava. She pressed send, watched the message disappear, and felt something release in her chest. It was not revenge yet, but it was power-shifting hands. Diane replied within an hour received. Proceeding with audit. Keep calm. Ava deleted the message chain immediately, closed the laptop, and exhaled. For months she had felt trapped in noise, constant explanations, constant excuses. Now there was only silence again, but this time it belonged to her. She walked to the balcony and looked out at the sea. The waves rolled steady, patient, inevitable. Behind her, Jack called from inside. "Did you pay the internet bill?" She smiled faintly. "Already handled," she said. He thanked her without looking up from his phone. Ava returned to the view and thought about how ordinary everything looked. The house, the furniture, the life they had built, it was all so convincing from the outside. No one would suspect that a quiet woman with steady hands had just built the foundation for his downfall. That night, she wrote in her private journal for the first time in months. It was not a confession, but a statement of record. April 27th. Sent data to Diane. No confrontation, no noise. Justice is a patient investment. She closed the notebook, placed it in the drawer, and returned to the living room. Jack was asleep again, the television flickering across his face. She turned off the light and whispered into the darkness. every lie has an invoice. Then she smiled to herself, a quiet, knowing smile that looked exactly like peace to anyone who did not understand what it really meant. The email arrived at 9 in the morning, polite in tone, but heavy in consequence. Diane had filed the official request for a full financial disclosure under California marital law. Ava imagined the sound it made when it hit Jack's inbox, like the first crack of thunder before a storm. By noon, he called her from the office, voice tight-clipped. "Did you do something with the bank accounts?" She looked at her reflection in the kitchen window and kept her tone calm. "No. Why, there is some legal nonsense," he snapped. "A request for statements. Probably a mistake." She murmured something neutral and hung up. 2 hours later, he came home early. The front door slammed. His face was pale eyes wide with confusion that smelled of fear. "Someone filed for an asset review," he said, pacing. "My company, the accounts, everything. They have my full name, tax ID, even the wallet tag. Who has that information?" Ava tilted her head slightly. "Maybe it is just the system doing its job." He glared at her, but she did not flinch. Panic looks good on him, she thought, and forced her lips not to move. He stormed into the garage and spent the next hour muttering to himself. Ava stayed at the kitchen table, listening through the thin wall as drawers opened and closed. Later, she checked the feed from the small camera she had hidden near the shelf. The video showed him deleting files, plugging in external drives, wiping data. He thought he could erase what she had already preserved. She watched him type frantically, trying to reset the passphrases of his wallets. "Redundancy saves marriages and ruins liars," she whispered. She had copied the backup keys to Jupiter weeks ago, stored offline untouched. His digital empire was an open book, and he was shredding blank pages. The next morning, he tried a different tactic. He made breakfast, set the table, and spoke softly as if nothing had happened. "You know, he said we could just close everything and start over somewhere else. No lawyers, no paperwork, just us." She stirred her coffee slowly, keeping her eyes on the cup. "You sound like someone running from a crime scene." His smile faltered. "I am trying to save our marriage." "Then you should have started with honesty," she said. He froze as if the word itself had weight. For a moment, she thought he might confess, but instead he turned defensive, muttering about people misunderstanding innovation and how not everyone appreciated the pressure he was under. She let him talk until his words lost meaning. By evening, he was back in his office pretending to work. Ava sat on the couch, phone in hand, waiting. When it rang, Siri's voice announced incoming call from liability. She blinked, then laughed softly. It was his name. Somehow her phone had glitched during an earlier sync, or maybe fate had a sense of humor. She let it ring out. Fitting. She thought, smiling for the first time in days. Later that night, she called Diane. "He is panicking," Ava said, deleting files, rewriting passwords. Diane's voice was steady. "Let him. The audit request stands. Every deletion looks like guilt. You have the copies. You hold the truth." Ava nodded, even though Diane could not see her. "Then we move forward." "Yes," Diane replied. "Next step is formal separation. We do it quietly, the same way he built his lies." Ava hung up and opened her laptop one last time that evening. The document titled Ledger of Lies was no longer just a record. It was a weapon wrapped in clarity. She added one final line before closing the file. May 3rd, formal request filed, spouse notified. She stared at the sentence for a moment and felt the weight of it settle in her chest. It was not satisfaction yet. It was justice beginning to take shape. The next morning, she printed the petition for legal separation and signed it at the notary's desk. Her hand did not shake. Justice wears silence like armor, she thought, as she watched the ink dry. The clerk stamped the paper and handed it back to her. Outside, the air smelled of salt and rain. She folded the document neatly and placed it in her bag beside the USB. When she got home, Jack was on the phone, voice raised, trying to convince someone that the audit was a clerical error. She walked past him without a word, climbed the stairs, and set the papers on the dresser. The house felt both foreign and familiar, a place she had outgrown without moving. Downstairs, Jack's voice cracked through the air. "I will fix this," he shouted. Ava closed the bedroom door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. She was not planning to fix anything. She was ending it one signature at a time. The first detonation had already happened. The rest would unfold by itself. The courthouse smelled of dust and fluorescent light. The air was too cold, the kind that made every sound sharper. Ava sat at the front of the courtroom, her hands folded neatly on the table, while Diane arranged the files beside her. Outside, reporters waited behind the glass doors, their cameras already humming. Ava caught a glimpse of them before turning away. She had not wanted publicity, but she understood its irony. He always wanted attention, she thought. Now he had it. Jack sat at the opposite table, pale and restless, adjusting his tie every few seconds. His lawyer whispered something, but Jack barely heard. His eyes kept darting to the judge's bench, then to Ava, then to the USB on the table that glinted softly under the lights. The hearing began. The clerk's voice echoed as case number 4021 Dalton versus Dalton was called. The title sounded like a bad joke. Diane stood calm and crisp, introducing herself and her client. Jack's attorney followed his tone defensive from the start. Ava barely listened. She watched Jack instead. The man who once managed every dollar of her life now looked like a child waiting for permission to speak. The judge adjusted his glasses. This proceeding concerns allegations of fraudulent asset concealment and misuse of marital funds, he said. His tone was neutral, but the weight of the words filled the room. Diane began by presenting a timeline. "Your Honor," she said, "the plaintiff provided documented proof of unauthorized transfers totaling $400,000, routed through multiple crypto wallets linked to the defendant's family and business." She passed the binder to the clerk, each page, sliding across the table like a quiet verdict. Jack's lawyer objected, claiming lack of proof of ownership. Diane simply raised one eyebrow and clicked the remote. The projector came to life, filling the wall with a QR code glowing bright white against the gray paint. "This," she said, "is the digital wallet, JD Digital Reserve. The transfers to Cheryl Designs and the accounts under Robert and Carol Dalton are verified. The blockchain confirms it. Numbers do not need your permission." The room fell silent. Jack shifted in his chair, throat tight. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Dalton, do you dispute ownership of this wallet?" Jack opened his mouth, then closed it again. "It is a company wallet," he said finally, "not personal." Diane smiled faintly. "Then perhaps you can explain why boutique renovations and luxury pet furniture were financed from it." A few people in the audience stifled laughter. The judge tapped his pen, once a signal for order. Jack's lawyer whispered something urgent, but Jack was staring at the screen. The QR code looked almost alive, pulsing like a mirror of his own panic. Diane continued, her voice calm but merciless. She showed the transfers, each labeled with date and amount, each leading back to the same chain of wallets. The evidence was clean, precise, undeniable. Ava watched quietly, hands still, expression unreadable. Inside, she felt the strange lightness that comes when truth finally steps into daylight. The exposure was not about revenge anymore. It was about gravity pulling lies to the surface. Jack's lawyer tried to pivot, claiming the money was part of an investment strategy, misunderstood by the plaintiff. Diane waited for him to finish, then placed another document on the table. "These are bank statements," she said. "The funds were converted to cash, not reinvested, withdrawn." The judge nodded slowly. "Mr. Dalton, you will need to explain this discrepancy." Jack looked trapped. "It was temporary," he said weakly. "We plan to return it." Diane replied, "By we, you mean your parents and cousin, correct?" His silence was confirmation enough. A low murmur rippled through the room. Ava leaned closer to Diane and whispered, "He is trending in court records." Diane did not smile, but the corner of her mouth twitched. Even the judge glanced up, hiding what might have been amusement. When the questioning ended, Diane summarized calmly, "Your Honor, my client's records prove not only unauthorized financial use, but deliberate concealment across multiple family accounts. The defendant's claim of error does not align with digital verification or common sense." The judge reviewed the evidence for a long moment. His pen stopped moving. "The blockchain data," he said, "shows consistent control from one source. That source matches the defendant's credentials. The court accepts the verification." Jack's head dropped into his hands. The verdict came minutes later, read in a voice that sounded final before the words even finished forming. "This court finds in favor of the plaintiff. Mr. Jack Dalton is ordered to return all misappropriated funds and pay an additional $80,000 in damages." The gavel hit the wood. The sound cracked through the air, clean and irreversible. Ava closed her eyes for 1 second. The tension that had lived in her shoulders for months finally released. She did not smile. She simply breathed. Jack turned toward her as the clerk gathered papers. "You ruined me," he whispered. She met his gaze without emotion. "No," she said softly. "You invested badly." Outside the courthouse, the air was bright and cold. Reporters called her name, asking for comments. She shook her head and walked past them, heels clicking against the marble floor. Each step sounded like punctuation on the story she had written for herself. Diane caught up beside her, holding out a copy of the ruling. "It is done," she said. Ava took it and nodded. Peace finally paid interest. Diane smiled at that. They stepped out into the sunlight where the noise of the city swallowed the echoes of the courtroom. For the first time in months, Ava felt light. Justice was not loud. It was quiet, exact, and unshakable. After the ruling, the consequences did not arrive like a single thunderclap. They rolled in one after another the way overdue bills do. The first piece of collateral karma landed on Jack himself. His company had depended on a carefully polished image of innovation and financial responsibility. The moment the court record became public and the financial disclosure became searchable, his employer called him in. They used professional language and sympathetic faces, but the message was simple. A man who hides $400,000 from his wife might not be a man to trust with client portfolios. They placed him on administrative leave. Within a week, he was out. His access was revoked. His corporate email was shut down. His health insurance was cut off at the end of the month. He called Ava that night, sounding smaller than she had ever heard him. She listened without interrupting. When he finished complaining about how unfair it all was, she said only one sentence: "The blockchain giveth and taketh away." There was no cruelty in her voice, only fact. If he had wanted privacy, he should not have left a public ledger behind. The second wave of fallout hit the people he thought would never be touched. IRS flagged the unusual movement of funds following the court order. What had been family money moving quietly from one relative to another was now recorded as potential tax evasion and misuse of marital assets. Letters were sent. Calls were made. His parents panicked first. His mother left 3 messages in a row, each more frantic than the last. When Ava did not pick up, she tried again from a different number. This time, Ava answered. Carol did not say hello. She began with accusation. "You destroyed this family. You embarrassed us. Your selfishness dragged everyone into it." Ava walked to the patio and looked at the calm street. Her tone stayed even. "I did not destroy anything. I only balanced the books." There was a long silence on the other end. Carol sputtered something about loyalty and keeping things in the family and how women should support their husbands. Ava almost laughed. Keeping things in the family was exactly what they had done. They had just kept her money in the family, too. She ended the call with a simple, "I hope you keep better records from now on." A few days later, Cheryl's boutique posted a cheerful photo of new arrivals. The next day, the post was gone. 2 days after that, the store went on temporary closure. The payment processor had frozen her account pending verification of source of funds. Cheryl texted Ava a furious paragraph accusing her of jealousy. Ava stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she copied a link and sent it back. It was a budgeting app. Under it, she typed "try balancing this time." She put her phone down and let the fallout continue without her. Word spread through the extended Dalton family that Ava had taken everything. No one mentioned that it was not taking, but returning. To them, she was the cold wife, the ungrateful one, the one who brought outsiders into private business. Toxic families often rewrite history that way. Ava did not bother to correct them. She had spent months collecting proof so that she would never again have to argue with people who chose convenience over truth. What mattered was that the state and the court and the agencies with real power all knew exactly what had been moved and when. That was the audience she needed. Jack tried to negotiate. He called again and again. Sometimes his voice was angry. Sometimes it was pleading. Sometimes it was almost nostalgic. He talked about the early days at Pacific Beach, the shared takeout on the floor, the plans they made when everything felt light. She listened to some of the voicemails just to measure his tone. Regret could sound so much like love to the untrained ear. To hers, it sounded like someone watching doors close one by one. She was not gloating. She was observing. There is a difference. Karma in this case was not a mystical force. It was a series of receipts finally reviewed by the right eyes. The woman who had been told she did not understand crypto now watched as an entire family adjusted their spending because of her. The woman who had been mocked for a $12 candle now saw people who bought luxury dog beds lose access to basic merchant services. Justice did not always roar. Sometimes it sent letters. Sometimes it froze accounts. Sometimes it simply removed comfort from people who misused trust. One evening while making dinner, Ava received a group text from an unknown number. It was from Jack's mother to the whole family asking for temporary contributions to cover legal fees. Ava read it twice. Then she pasted another link to the same budgeting app. She added a single line. It helps when you list things honestly. Then she muted the thread. She did not hate them. She just no longer financed them. She set her phone down, opened her laptop, and updated her personal budget, adding a new line called "Freedom," smiling at how clean numbers looked when no one was stealing from them and how quiet justice sounded when it finally finished talking. That was enough today. The call came on a quiet Thursday morning when the sky was gray enough to match his tone. Ava was reviewing invoices for a new client when her phone lit up with a name she had not seen in months. Jack. She let it ring twice before answering. His voice trembled between forced calm and desperation. "Ava, I need to see you. Just once. Please." She paused long enough for him to notice. Why, she asked. "I need your help," he said quickly. "It is about the IRS. They are freezing everything. I do not know what to do." Ava could hear the ocean through her open window. It sounded steadier than his breathing. "Meet me at the cafe on Ocean Front," she said. 30 minutes. She hung up before he could thank her. When she arrived, the cafe was almost empty, except for tourists by the window and the smell of burnt espresso. Jack was already there, sitting at a corner table facing the sea. He looked thinner, his once-tailored shirt now wrinkled. As she walked in, his eyes lit with a mix of hope and regret. "You look good," he said. Ava sat down slowly. "You look unemployed." He flinched but tried to recover. "Fair," he said, forcing a smile. "You lost everything," she said quietly. I gained clarity. The words landed between them like a verdict. He looked away, hands twisting around his coffee cup. "I know what I did was wrong," he said. "But you could help me fix it. They are auditing everything. If you talk to them, maybe explain it was a misunderstanding, we could both avoid more trouble." Ava leaned back. You mean you. The IRS wants full cooperation," he said quickly. "If we work together, they might reduce penalties. I thought maybe you still had the files, the ones Diane submitted." Ava looked at him for a long moment. His voice had softened into that familiar pleading tone he used whenever he wanted something. It had worked once, not anymore. "You are asking me to help you hide again," she said. "No," he replied, shaking his head. "I am asking you to help me survive." Ava sipped her coffee, the taste bitter but grounding. "I am sure you will find what you need," she said lightly. "Maybe in the evidence folder." His jaw clenched. "You do not have to be cruel." "I am not being cruel," she said. "I am being consistent." Silence stretched between them, filled by the sound of the surf outside. He sighed, eyes glistening. "You know," he began, "I never meant to hurt you. I was trying to build something for us. I thought if I succeeded, you would forgive the methods." She studied him, remembering the confidence that once charmed her, now cracked by consequence. "You did not build," she said. "You borrowed from you, from them, from everyone, and you called it ambition." He looked at her as if trying to find the woman who used to admire him. She was gone. He whispered, "You used to believe in me." Ava nodded slowly. "Yes, until you made believing feel like blindness." She stood up, placing her empty cup down carefully. Jack's voice rose in panic. "Please, Ava, I could still make this right. Maybe we can find common ground." She turned slightly, her tone calm but final. "You hid money. I hid patience. Guess which paid interest?" He stared at her words, failing. For a second, he looked like he wanted to reach for her hand. Then he stopped, realizing it would not bridge the distance anymore. "You are colder than I remember," he said softly. "No," she answered, "just clearer." She walked out without looking back. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds, scattering light across the water. Ava stood by the railing, breathing in the salt air. Behind her, through the cafe glass, Jack sat motionless, his reflection blurred against the waves. She did not feel triumph. What she felt was completion. Justice did not always roar in courtrooms. Sometimes it ended quietly at a seaside cafe with a single line that left no space for reply. She opened her phone and sent a message to Diane. "He contacted me, asked for cooperation with IRS. I declined." Diane's reply came seconds later. "Good. Let him face the math alone." Ava smiled faintly. The ocean breeze lifted her hair, warm and forgiving. She thought of all the times she had stayed silent to keep the peace, and how silence now sounded like strength. Some debts were paid in money. Others were paid in truth. She had collected both. The letter from the IRS arrived on a bright June morning. Ava almost missed it in the stack of mail until she saw the seal. The envelope was thick official, printed in quiet authority. She sat at the kitchen counter, the same place where months ago she had first noticed missing transactions, and opened it with a calm she had earned. The letter confirmed the audit was complete. Funds had been traced, accounts closed, and penalties enforced. The report listed totals like the final chapter of a long equation. $210,000 returned, plus accrued fines and restitution. Ava read the numbers twice, then exhaled slowly. "The cleanest profit I have ever made," she murmured half to herself. Not because it was about money, but because it was clean. Money taken through deceit had come back as justice quantified. She placed the letter in her ledger, not under income, but under closure. The next few weeks unfolded like quiet reconstruction. The noise of conflict had faded, replaced by something steadier. She took long walks near Pacific Beach, again this time not to escape, but to think. One afternoon, she stopped by the same cafe where the confrontation with Jack had ended. The waitress recognized her and smiled. "Back to your usual," Ava nodded. "Yes, but this time to celebrate." The ocean looked different now. Not softer, not friendlier, just honest. The way truth always looked once you accepted it. She had not planned what to do with the returned funds at first. The money itself felt heavy, symbolic. But when Diane visited one weekend and they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Diane said something that stayed with her. "You could build something from this," she said. "Not revenge, but repair." The idea grew quietly after that. Ava began sketching plans, researching grants, writing notes in the margins of old journals. By August, she had formed the Phoenix Ledger Fund, a small nonprofit dedicated to helping women track, recover, and protect their financial assets after betrayal. She started with workshops, online classes, and a network of volunteer accountants and lawyers who believed in economic justice. The first seminar was held in a modest co-working space overlooking downtown San Diego. 10 women came then, 20 then 50. They were different ages and stories, but shared the same expression she had once worn, the mixture of exhaustion and readiness. Ava stood before them, her tone steady but warm. "Numbers are stories," she said. "They tell you what people value. When someone hides money from you, they are not hiding numbers. They are hiding power. Justice can be itemized." The room stayed quiet for a moment before soft applause filled it. After the session, a woman in her late 50s lingered by the table. She had streaks of silver in her hair and nervous hands. "Can I ask something?" she said. Ava nodded. "Of course." "What if I find $50,000 my husband moved without telling me?" Ava smiled. "Then smile and call a lawyer." The woman laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from years of holding breath. Others nearby joined in. Humor had become a strange ally in Ava's new world. It did not erase pain, but reminded people they had survived it. Each story that reached her inbox carried echoes of her own. Betrayal looked different every time, but always followed the same math. Take trust, multiply by greed, divide by guilt. The fund grew slowly but steadily. Local newspapers began to notice. A small article appeared in the San Diego Chronicle titled, "From Crypto Chaos to Quiet Justice." It featured Ava's photo standing in front of a whiteboard covered in diagrams. She almost laughed at how the journalist described her as a financial detective for the betrayed. Diane framed the article and gave it to her as a gift. Ava hung it near her desk, not as pride, but as proof that truth could build something constructive after destruction. The irony was not lost on her. The same blockchain that had been used to hide money had become the map that exposed it. The same silence that once protected Jack had become the silence she used to rebuild. Karma did not need applause. It just needed movement. Late one evening, she sat at her desk finalizing reports for the foundation's next quarter. Outside, the city hummed. Inside, the numbers on the spreadsheet formed neat lines that felt like calm breathing. She thought about how far she had come from the woman who used to ask permission to check her own bank account. Now she was the one teaching others to ask questions, to verify, to reclaim. Her phone buzzed with a new message from one of the participants. The text said, "I found the missing money. Thank you for helping me see." Ava smiled and typed back, "You found your truth. I only showed you where to look." She closed her laptop, poured herself a glass of wine, and stepped out onto the balcony. The sky over San Diego shimmered in faint gold, the sound of the waves, faint but constant. Karma was not magic. It was math written in emotion. It came back to balance the ledger, no matter how long it took. Ava leaned against the railing and whispered to herself, "The cleanest profit I have ever made." The new apartment was smaller than the Pacific Beach house, but it felt wider somehow. Ava stood by the window, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the scent of lemon cleaner. The walls were white and untouched, ready for new stories that did not involve anyone else's signature. She placed the last plate into the cupboard and smiled at the simplicity of it all. The silence here was different. It was not the heavy kind that came from fear or avoidance. It was the light kind that followed peace. That evening, she cooked dinner for herself for the first time in months. Nothing extravagant, just roasted vegetables and seared salmon. As the pan hissed, she caught her reflection in the glass door. There was no trace of the woman who used to lower her voice at the dinner table to keep the peace. She poured herself a glass of white wine, set the table for one, and sat down. The first bite tasted like freedom wrapped in olive oil. "Peace tastes expensive," she whispered, smiling at her own thought. She finished the meal slowly, savoring the way small routines had become a luxury she owned. Later that week, Lydia stopped by carrying a bag of croissants in that familiar tone of teasing affection. "You know," she said as she stepped inside, "you have managed to turn numbers into justice." Ava laughed, handing her a cup of coffee. "And I made peace the ROI," she replied. They sat on the couch, surrounded by sunlight and laughter that did not need to hide behind politeness. Lydia asked about the foundation. The calls from women across the country, the ones who now said Ava's story gave them courage to check their own accounts and their own truths. Ava listened quietly. The gratitude from others was humbling, but what truly filled her was something smaller, quieter, personal. It was knowing she had built a life where trust began and ended with herself. "Do you ever miss him?" Lydia asked gently. Ava looked out the window where the ocean shimmered far in the distance. "No," she said softly. "I miss the idea of what I thought we were, but that was just another miscalculated investment." Lydia nodded and raised her coffee in a mock toast. To better portfolios, she joked. They both laughed until Ava's cat padded into the room demanding attention. The little creature had been another quiet victory. She had adopted it from a local shelter 2 weeks after the court case ended. It had one torn ear and a habit of sleeping on her laptop. "Even my cat has better financial boundaries," Ava said, watching it curl up on the rug. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking about simple things, movies, work, the absurd price of groceries. It felt ordinary and perfect. When Lydia finally left, the apartment fell into that pleasant evening calm again. Ava walked around adjusting picture frames and tidying up papers. On her desk was the framed article from the San Diego Chronicle, and next to it a small glass jar labeled "Next Chapter Fund." She added $20 to it and smiled. She had no idea what the next chapter would look like, but it was the first time she did not need to plan it around anyone else. Before going to bed, she sat down at her computer to set up the new Wi-Fi connection. The network name field blinked, waiting for input. For a moment she hesitated, then typed "Crypto Justice" T4 and hit save. When the connection reloaded successfully, she whispered to herself, "Signal stronger now." It was a joke, but also a truth. Her signal was stronger now, clearer, reaching only those who deserved to hear it. She closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and stood by the window once more. The city below hummed in quiet rhythm. Somewhere in that hum was the life she had rebuilt piece by piece, ledger by ledger. No drama, no debts, no lies, just balance. She breathed in the night air and exhaled contentment. Tomorrow would bring work, new cases, new stories of other women finding their voices. Tonight was just for her. The peace she had earned was not loud or grand. It was steady and real, like interest quietly accumulating on an account that no one could touch again. The invitation arrived in her inbox on a quiet Monday morning. The subject line read, "Forbes Women in Finance Podcast Invitation." Ava stared at it for a long moment before opening the message. They wanted her to speak about her journey about uncovering financial deceit, rebuilding autonomy, and turning betrayal into empowerment. She reread the words twice, then leaned back in her chair, smiling softly. Not long ago, her story had been something whispered in courtrooms and late-night phone calls. Now it was being told in boardrooms and podcasts. When the recording day arrived, she entered the studio with the same calm confidence that had carried her through every audit and every courtroom step. The host, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, greeted her warmly. "Ava, thank you for joining us. Your foundation has inspired thousands of women to reclaim control over their finances. But before all that, you were just someone trying to survive betrayal." What changed? Ava adjusted her microphone, her voice steady but gentle. "Pain changed into purpose. I stopped counting what I lost and started counting what I could build. Quiet justice is not about revenge. It is about dignity over money." The host nodded thoughtfully. "Do you ever think about him? About what happened?" Ava smiled, the kind that carried no bitterness. "Not anymore. Some stories end when the lesson begins." The interview continued with questions about the Phoenix Ledger Fund, financial literacy, and emotional resilience. When the session ended, the host reached out to shake her hand. "You're calm," she said softly. It feels like strength. Ava replied, because it is. Outside, the city was bathed in late afternoon light. She walked toward the coast where the ocean stretched endlessly ahead. The same waves that once sounded like escape now sounded like arrival. She sat on a bench overlooking the water, her reflection faint in the glass of her phone screen. She scrolled through messages from women who had written to her. One said, "You made me realize justice can be quiet." Another said, "I am learning to rebuild without hate." Ava closed her phone and let the wind wash through her hair. Her peace did not need to be loud. Silent revenge, she thought, is still revenge, just cleaner, just wiser. A group of children ran past her chasing a red kite, their laughter scattering across the shore. She watched them until the sound became part of the rhythm of the sea. Somewhere behind her, the world kept moving fast, full of noise and urgency. But here, on this edge of calm time, slowed. Emotional resilience was not about forgetting what happened. It was about remembering it differently. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, eyes following the horizon. Her mind replayed the entire journey in fragments. The discovery, the confrontation, the trial, the rebuilding. Each memory was now just a number on a closed ledger, no longer bleeding into her present. A gull flew low over the water, catching a reflection of the sun on its wings. Ava whispered to herself almost like a final equation. He hid $400,000 in crypto. I found peace worth more. The words lingered in the air like a benediction. She brushed the sand from her hands and began walking along the boardwalk. Passers-by might have seen just another woman enjoying the afternoon, unaware that every step was a symbol of balance restored. The story had started with deceit and ended with truth, but the real victory was how quietly it all settled. No headlines, no vengeance, just closure written in calm breaths and honest laughter. As she reached her car, her phone buzzed again with new messages, some from women she had helped, some from strangers who had simply heard her story. She opened one at random. It read, "You reminded me that reclaiming respect starts with believing I deserve it." Ava smiled, typing her reply before starting the engine. "You do, always." She drove home as the sun dipped below the line of the ocean, painting everything gold. The city lights began to flicker awake. It was the same coast where she had once cried over betrayal, but tonight it felt reborn. Justice without hate, she thought. That was the truest kind. When she parked, she sat for a moment, eyes closed, listening to the faint hum of the world around her. The ledger of her life was finally balanced. Peace was her final profit.